Is it difficult to discern what is fair? Because I'm sure, and this gets into really, and this is why I like this topic so much. It gets into like this psychological question of what is fairness. And I guess it depends on each use case, but have you run into those issues a lot of like determining from like the first step, what does fair actually mean in this context?
Oh, absolutely. In pretty much every kind of engagement that we have with our clients, especially if they're interested in it, in bias and fairness, the first question is that what fair means to you, what fair means in the context that you're thinking about. And it is a complex topic.
Yeah.
Depending on, we all have different perspectives. And as you know, there are so many different definitions of fairness out there. So how would you apply it to the use case? And sometimes you need to think about the regulations. For example, in hiring, you have regulations that specifically defines what fair means in the context of hiring. But in other areas, you may not have that regulations that would clarify it for you or make it easy for you to kind of think about fairness. So you have to think about what are the kind of who gets the favorable outcome and what favorable outcome in that context means. And based on that, then thinking about what would be the effect of each of those fairness metrics that I'm thinking about. How would they look like in my use case? And based on that, decide whether if, one would be better than the others or more appropriate. Another thing that, adds to the complexity is sometimes it's really hard to pick only one. And if you're not sure, you may evaluate your system for multiple metrics, and in one of them you're fair, but in the other ones you're not fair. And that kind of, when you're still not sure what is appropriate, now that creates another level of kind of confusion and complexity to it. That, okay, why I'm fair in one and why I'm not fair in the other. It's not intuitive, but that happens depending on the definitions that you're using. So, when we have these engagements, we try to help and kind of guide our clients to have an understanding about how to approach just defining fairness and kind of thinking about it in the context of use case and what would be the result of that. And based on the values that they have, the regulations, then they can kind of pick the one that's more appropriate for them.
Wow. That sounds so complex, or at least has the potential to get really, really complex. Is that the most difficult part, you would say, of your role? Having to have those kind of conversations and having like the opinions of not only your clients, but maybe even people on your team, and then having that kind of back and forth?
Absolutely. And, when you're thinking about defining fairness, right? Sometimes people think that, oh, that's a data scientist role. They would kind of evaluate the system. But what we are trying to do is kind of bringing that to the point that it's not only data scientists who has to figure out what fair means. People from compliance team, from management team, everybody should be on the table. All the stakeholders should be in the room and discuss what fair means for the use case that they have. So one of the challenges that we have, the data scientists, they're technical. They understand if you put a kind of equation in front of them, they understand it. But if you're bringing someone from compliance, executives who may not be technical, talking about false positives, false negatives could already kind of, for them, would be overwhelming. Right. So how would you bring that into a conversation without making that conversation too complicated that they would disengage? So, the challenging part is to have that conversation in a language that everybody understands, because their inputs, from the compliance, from executives, from the team that might be using this system, for each of these kind of personas have their own perspective of what fair means. So and we need to bring their ideas on the table. They need to understand it, and that the most challenging part is to make sure that everyone's on the same page. Everyone understands what's the consequence of using one fairness metric versus the other, and even a step back, whether everyone understands what that fairness metric means.